Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's the podcast where we are trying to take a look at every single Best Picture winner in random order and rank them. And this week, while it wasn't quite in random order, almost random order, we are talking about The Apartment from 1960, directed by one Billy Wilder. Of course, I'm joined by Tucker, Tanner, and Abram, but today we've got a special guest, my friend Ryan, who is a known apartment lover, is here to talk about why he thinks this film is especially great. Because I think we're going to lay the cards out on the table right now that this film has a lot of sway behind it, has a lot of power to convince us of its worthwhileness to be somewhere in the upper reaches of this list. We will see where. Who knows what's going to happen during the course of discussion, of course. But that's what we are going on about now. What did we talk about last week? Well, last week we talked about this film called Gigi, and we didn't like it that much. In fact, we thought that it was pretty far down on the list. In fact, it went all the way down at place number 45 out of 50. So
good God,
not very high, and its average score all the way down there at the bottom was a 4.5. So we had a lot of issues with the film. And if you want to hear them in specific, I highly recommend going and checking out last week's episode. But before we go any further, I want to hand it off to Tanner, who has our featured comment on that oh-so-sweet Gigi movie.
Well, Timo, it might not be oh-so-sweet, because our classic commenter, our good friend here on Quest, John Tor11, agrees with us in large part. He says, Gigi is a meaningless movie. Great production and stunning visual colors that couldn't save this My Fair Lady-ish story that was thinner than the paper it was written on.
Ooh.
And who had the effing idea to make this a musical? I can't understand how this won over Tennessee Williams' Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, with catty Elizabeth Taylor and a fantastic Paul Newman. 1.7 out of 10. This was another fail that I'm sure not even musical fans would enjoy today.
That is pretty scathing.
Right.
That's Jean Tor gave it quite a lower score than we did. So interesting. Yeah. And
we have another scathing review. I just want to shout out since it's brief. It's from our good friend Seth, who says Gigi bad. Boom, featured comment next week. Which he was right. Sure,
he was
why
right.
not?
He did it.
We can't.
Look how easy it is, guys.
Yeah,
just comment.
Just comment, and we will talk about it. Well, I think it's time to talk about The Apartment. Who wants to jump in right off the bat and give us the rundown? Maybe a little plot synopsis to start it off.
What is this movie? You gotta hand it off to Ryan.
Ryan,
he's a guest.
Yeah, Ryan. Yeah. You wanna lay it on us? What happens in this movie? Just start.
Lay it all out there, Ryan.
Sure.
You've seen it a few times, as I imagine.
Yeah, I've seen it like at least 5 or 6 times. It is a classic. The Apartment is about corporate everyman C.C. Baxter. His friends call him Bud. He is an insurance agent who lends out his apartment to his bosses and people around the office for them to use for, let's say, extramarital affairs.
Nefarious reasons.
Yeah, nefarious reasons. And it's about his life and him falling in love. A lot of great love triangle stuff there. Very interesting stuff. It's from, like Timo said, director Billy Wilder. Somewhat late in his career, but not all the way late, but definitely in the latter half. It's his second Best Picture winner after 1945's The Lost Weekend. It's great.
Yeah, there we go. And someone else want to take us off with the first thoughts on the film, and we'll circle back to Ryan in a moment because I know what he thinks, but I want you guys to know what he thinks too.
This was Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Tucker. You go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think the first thoughts of this film, and when you're going into it knowing that it's such a big part of film history, is that legacy that not only this film has, but Billy Wilder's entire filmography. Him making a lot of those films that we see as the classics, as the noir films, as the he had covered a whole range of genres and was such a diverse director. But this is kind of one of those crowning jewels of one of the crowning jewels of film history. And this is my second time seeing this film, and the first time around I was not expecting very much. I'm like, oh, this is Best Picture, whatever. I watched a couple years ago, but on this second repeat watch and thinking about it more critically and trying to think through, okay, here are the plot points, here are the character developments, here's how this screenplay, which is one of the screenplays of all time, works to lay out its scenario and its characters and their developments. Is there holes in it? And I mean, really, no, because that's what this film is known for, is that essentially flawless screenplay that feeds so naturally into every aspect of the film.
Yeah.
I
Tanner,
would.
you have some thoughts?
I'd have to wholeheartedly agree with Tucker. I'd never seen this film before, and I was very surprised because what I knew about Billy Wilder from the constant ramblings that Tucker and Timo, and I'm sure Ryan also participates in, is that Billy Wilder, he's one of those all-time great, like, comedy directors. I'm like, okay, Apartment, it'll be nice to have, like, a comedy break with the Best Picture winners, but no. This film pulls a bit of a bait and switch with you, a beautiful one, if I might add that. That it starts off pretty comedic, and then it takes, like, a hard turn into, like, this very heartfelt, emotional story. And they both work fantastically, and due to Billy Wilder's writing and direction, it feels natural, it feels balanced, and it feels, I'll say it, near perfect.
Wow, there you go. Abram, you wanna throw in your 2 cents?
No.
Not particularly? Uh-oh. Well, that's a great start to this episode.
So what I like about doing this show with you guys is I don't have the basis in film history that you guys do. And so when I watch The Apartment, I don't know who Billy Wilder is really. If I see his body of work, I know that he's very impressive, but I don't care about him, frankly. His name means nothing. The legacy of The Apartment means nothing. The people in the movie mean nothing to me. I'm coming.
Damn, not
at
a
this...
Jack Lemmon guy? Good God, I love Jack Lemmon so much.
He does a great job in the film, but my point is I come at this from a very different angle than how you guys are approaching the movie, and I enjoyed it. For me, I found it a little bit long because I think it shows its hand very early as to what the theme of the film is, and it wraps up about where I expected it was going to wrap up. I think that the journey from the opening frame to the closing frame is very inventive and very fun, but ultimately, removed from the context that you guys are talking about, I found it to be a pretty cutting and enjoyable satire, but perhaps one that I didn't connect to it as strongly as you guys did, because I feel like I knew what we were doing pretty early on.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Ryan and I are in a college class about Billy Wilder together, and the way I was thinking, and so Abram comes in with like no context, and Ryan and I come in with all of the context because we've been reading multiple biographies of the director as part of our class, and so in thinking about this film, I see it as like to me, it's a natural progression of Wilder as a director, and going from, his earlier works and his comedies and his romance, and this is everything put together that he does great. It's all of his best qualities in a film that is executed at the top level with some of Wilder's favorite actors, and like Tucker said, a super tightly knit script, which is Wilder's thing. He is a writer, and he loved writing and making it all fit and work. And I think everything that Wilder as a director stands for is in this movie, and is maybe the best in this movie. But I want to let Ryan go because Ryan is a knowledge expert about these fields also. So what do you think?
Look at him. He's got that bit in his mouth. He's just chomping at it. He's just raring
I'm so
to go.
excited. I think The Apartment is like a perfect movie. I really do. I'll echo what they're saying about the perfect screenplay. I think in terms of setups and payoffs, the way that Wilder uses like the economy of the screenplay to have everything have like a call back or a call forward, I think is really not only smart, but also works really well. You have a lot of lines that are then repeated later, or referenced later. And I don't think that's necessarily just like it's like reference later, haha, like it's the line we said earlier, it's funny. I think a lot of it has very important thematic ties. You'll see a lot of the stuff that especially that Bud, CC Baxter, played by Jack Lemmon, who's once again also perfect in this movie. A lot of the times when he's repeating phrases from earlier, he's doing so as kind of an active performance, right? He's like trying to like pretend to be this like manly guy, whether it's to Dr. Dreyfus or to Dr. Dreyfus's wife. And it just calls back into the theme of how to like, Dr. Dreyfus puts it as like how to be a mensch in the modern world, how to be a human being. Which I think is an interesting point, especially coming out of like 50s, nuclear family consumerism kind of stuff. I think it's a very interesting critique of corporations, of capitalism during that time. and how sometimes that kind of stuff can, turn into de-individuation and take an individual out of themselves and more as part of like a whole company, and in doing so cause you to do some perhaps less than ethical things like Baxter does in the film. I think it's a very interesting theme of how, like I said, to be a person in the modern world. It's filled with great performances. I mentioned Jack Lemmon, who I think is perfect here. There's a quote that's given to Billy Wilder. I don't know exactly how true it is, but the quote is that Jack Lemmon and Charlie Chaplin are the two like born actors, and that he would trust Lemmon with anything. In terms of like whatever Lemmon wants to try something, he's always like, go for it. Well, normally Wilder's very like beholden to like, this is my screenplay, this is what you're gonna say on screen. Lemmon is a very natural actor, especially in Wilder's work. I think he's great in here. It's not a very showy performances like you get in some other Best Picture winners, but it never feels like he's acting. It always feels very authentic and natural, which I think sells the emotional core of it. But yeah, I think it's great.
Wow.
I also think it's beautifully shot. It gives like this great noir lighting, despite the fact that it is like this very like comedy centric film. But the black and white cinematography especially helps sell that kind of like old school Hollywood vibe. Yeah.
Awesome. I
very pretty.
want to go from the top because you hit on a ton of points. I think you just laid out
Yeah.
the roadmap
Most
for the
of the
rest
points.
of the video.
This is what we call an introduction, a thesis statement, summarizing the points to come ahead.
You were
I was just writing a
talking.
paper last night, by the way.
You were talking about the criticism that this film levies, and I think that is an interesting thing of Wilder's work that we don't always see in other films, and sometimes in other Best Picture winners, but makes, I think, this as a Best Picture a particularly strong contender in that it's beyond just a story about this dude lending out his apartment and being sort of used in that regard. It's about how he's treated within this company, and it kind of is really not for it at all. It really says like, this is bad, and we don't, Wilder doesn't support what happens to the people who work in these companies in kind of like an exaggerated, fictionalized way, but that message and that scathing critique, which is a consistent thing across a lot of his films, where he, takes a topic and really just dives in and says what's wrong with it. That is, I think, a really awesome part and a really strong like thematic foundation to help build up the ideas that the rest of the film is presenting.
Well, Timo, I'm glad you brought that up because I saw that Ryan is a man of film trivia, as am myself. He actually stole a few of the pieces I was going to bring out about how Billy Wilder compared Jack Lemmon to Charlie Chaplin and really let him play with the script when that was not something that Billy Wilder was about. But to your point about this film as a sort of critique and satirization of corporate culture in America in the 1960s, this film was lauded by Soviet critics for its indictment of American capitalism and how it was a story that could only exist in a capitalist city like New York. So at a dinner they held a dinner honoring Billy Wilder in East Germany this one time, and he got up there and he was talking about the film. And he's like, it's a story that could happen anywhere. It could happen in Hong Kong, Tokyo, Rome, Paris, London. And he said, but the one place it couldn't happen was Moscow. And everyone in East Germany, it's the 1960s, everyone stands up and applauds him for saying that. And then the applause eventually dies down, and he says, the reason this picture couldn't happen in Moscow is that in Moscow, nobody has his own apartment. And they did not applaud that. They were deathly quiet.
What a guy! Yeah. What a guy!
He throws it both ways. And you see that throughout like his whole filmography. Basically, Ninotchka, a famous film of his that criticizes both capitalism and the socialist ideologies. It's pretty funny how he makes all of that fit and work. It all works, and you're like, oh, I agree with him here, and I agree with him here. It's like, wow. Mm-hmm. Yeah, great point.
Yeah, I do love how he portrays corporate culture in this. Like, there's a great comedic bit where it's like, because the whole like first half of the film is, you learn that C.C. Baxter is doing all this to get the promotion. He wants to move up in the world and move away from his tiny desk that's one amongst 1,000 on that one floor. And he finally gets that room after selling himself out a little bit and selling out Shirley MacLaine as well. and it's him. He's setting up all his stuff in his office, and the camera like cuts to a wider shot, and you realize just he's in a room on the same floor, like staring right at where he used to be, where he used to sit. That's a great like comedic moment, and it serves the satirization that we were talking about.
Yeah, I think the reason this film works so well is the way that it balances the wit and the darker themes. Because you start off, it's blatantly a comedy about this ironic situation of this guy who's trying to work his way up the capitalist ladder, and all his bosses just like, hey, buddy boy, give me a thing, and you got everything's getting caught up in the networking and having to call the girls at the switchboard, and the boss is not talking to one another, and everyone trying to keep it on the down low, so they're not really telling one another. But that gets everything all sort of complicated, and of course Baxter is just getting worse and worse and worse because he's not thinking about himself almost at all, because he's just putting everyone else before himself. And all of that is really funny, but as you start to notice the cracks in his facade and the way that he is opening up as he learns about Fran's life, and the twists come that sort of reframe all the relationships of the characters, it introduces a lot of really dark themes that sort of reveal the other side of this. Is there are consequences to everything that they're doing, and the things that you thought were lighthearted and fun are actually causing people's lives to be upended, whether that's maritally or health-wise or socially. And when you look back on this film from the end, which ends in a positive place, but after a period of 30-45 minutes of just dourness, because you're learning about suicide and divorce and poverty and all this stuff, you're like, man, that really started with CC Baxter cracking some jokes about like sex in a key. Like it's an interesting progression that I think puts this up there as one of those really important Best Picture winners that's able to be fun and witty and engaging because it's Billy Wilder's sharp script, but have those really important themes that we feel are lacking in something like Gigi or like Oliver, that we're like, man, well, they could have gone farther with this. But Billy Wilder hits it on both fronts, which is very important.
He does indeed. Abram, I want to hear what you're thinking, because you do have that alternate perspective of ours. And so what does all this mean to you?
Well, I like just listening to all of you guys use these big words and all these ideas. And
Everyone's never heard half the shit we're saying here.
Certainly not. I've got my pocket dictionary open off the side of my frame here. But I think that for me, the thematic material, I think, is why the film stayed interesting. But at the same time, I'm not sure that the juxtaposition of the sort of corporate bro culture that is being established in a comedic lens, juxtaposed against Fran's attempted suicide, really works all that well for me, because ultimately I'm not dumb watching the movie, right? I know that as the first half of the film is unfolding, I understand the consequences that are being set up. Mm-hmm. And so on a plot level, I like how we see CC Baxter come to terms with these things, like the reveal of the mirror, the broken mirror being given back to Sheldrake, being connected then to Fran. I think on a plot level, that stays interesting. But on a thematic level, I kind of understand right away, yeah, these guys are just lying to their wives and destroying their home lives, and I understand what we're communicating. And so I found the film very watchable for the first half or so. But when we end up in that apartment, as we're trying to hide what's happening.
Who's the real
Fran.
The apartment?
Yeah. But when we get there, I just don't know if the characters on a plot level are motivating me the same way, because we get the reveals, sure, of CC Baxter's attempted suicide. We see Fran's attempted suicide, the relationship with the neighbors and everything, right? But I feel like the core of the movie then, for me, sort of is lost, because I already understood that this was the cause, this was the root of this bigger problem. These people's lives are being destroyed by the actions in the apartment, and now we're seeing that, and I like it, but at the same time, I don't know if, for me personally, the character of CC Baxter is interesting enough to motivate what happens in that back half for me. Because then it becomes more about the characters, because I already understand where we're moving thematically. And so I found that portion of the film to really drag. And I think you could have cut out 15, 20 minutes of the runtime and made it stronger for me. Because ultimately, I'm not sure this is a film that is motivated by its characters as much as it's motivated by the thematic material. And it just doesn't quite service that for me when you get to the back half.
Sure.
That's really interesting. I do think that the reason that this film works and why you're able to connect to those themes and that plot concept, which is of course very witty, very clever, very fun, is because I personally see CC Baxter and Jack Lemmon's performance as him as this sort of everyman guy who's put down by everyone around him. So you don't get a ton about his personality or what he's thinking. You're always seeing him put everyone first, and it does create a disconnect from that character, but I think that's really intentional in placing you in the shoes of this guy that no one really cares about. No one really knows him. He says his friends call him Bud, but no one calls him that because he doesn't have any friends. And I think that there is an interesting interplay there that when you are removed from that first half that is snappy and fun and very disconnected from him, and you're given a chance to hone in on he's a bachelor and he's really used to living his life this way, and he will put everyone else first if it means that he can work harder. But then you learn these darker things about him, and it sort of reveals that this is all a facade, and his personality is deeper than it seems on surface level. And I do think I'm curious about what about that character does leave you wanting more from him, because when you're looking at Jack Lemmon's performance and the script and the progression of this character and the plot and the ways that he impacts the people around him and finally comes to terms with his own what's the word I'm looking for? Motivation, his own things that he's able to do for himself, that comes to a really satisfying conclusion that both wraps up his character arc and his relationships with his friends, and again reframes that first half of the movie.
See, I think
looking for agency, maybe he gains agency a lot.
Good
at
God,
the end
that
of the
was
movie.
just on the top of my head, but it didn't come out.
He gains agency, but I'm not sure if I really believe it. And I think that's part of the thing. A lot of what we learn about him in the second half, again, is tacit, because Billy Wilder is a very good writer. And so when we learn that he's playing a lot of cards by himself, or he's clearly a bachelor because he's using a tennis racket as a spaghetti strainer. That's not something that a married man is ever going to be allowed to do, right? There's certain commentaries about what would be expected of as Ryan was talking about, of the nuclear family or the bachelor at this time that's played up, right? But at the same time, I think I got that from the first half of the film. I sort of understood that already. The ways that he's got nothing to do. He's being walked over. He doesn't really have friends because they don't give a damn if he's sick. They want to go have sex in his apartment. So he's going to be here working. He's going to be doing all of that, right? I felt like I understood a lot of these things already. And when we end up in the apartment and he's still covering for Sheldrake pretty much the entire time, sure, we see that relationship shift as he becomes more interested in Fran, but he was always interested in Fran. And then when the movie ends with him giving up his key, cool, I like that we're ending that criticism there, but ultimately I think they would have been more power actually if he never gained agency, if the film ended with yeah, he's going to give Sheldrake back the key and he's going to stay in this hierarchical corporate structure, because otherwise it feels like for the sake of ending the film, he's just going to let it all go. He's going to end up with Fran and the film's going to end. I felt like there was a disjunction there for me, especially when a lot of what we get in the minutia about his character in the actual apartment, I feel like we already learned in broad strokes in the first half.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think what it comes down to for me is the depth that's added to CC Baxter's character when he's sharing those moments, those scenes with Fran in the apartment. He's sort of he learns the consequences of his actions, and that, you know, by nature of that happening adds depth to his character. That he realizes that his actions, his morals that he's held up until this point, where he's like, yeah, I'm sort of a bumbling guy, but hey, it's all to get ahead in the business world, you know. He comes to recognize that is a very toxic mindset, and that can have that has ripple effects that affect people around him, and that, you know, that at that point he sort of rejects that sort of like laissez-faire, do what you will, take the apartment from some guy, cheat on your wife with the elevator girl, and let what happens happen, because it's not going to affect you. And he realizes in talking to Fran that does have effects. He humanizes one-to-one with a person who is directly impacted by someone who's higher up, who's farther along in that sort of corporate
Ladder.
the corporate ladder, but like the dehumanization that comes with that.
Sure. Yeah.
They're farther along in that dehumanizing journey, and he comes to realize the effects of that, and that is the deepening of CC Baxter's character, along with Fran. I think Shirley MacLaine is fantastic in this.
Yeah.
For a lot of that first part, even though it is comedic, she's the one that's bearing the brunt of all the drama, especially in that first half, and even most of it in the second half. All of her scenes with Sheldrake in the apartment, or when they're at the dinner or whatever, it's just great because you can see that she just exudes this sort of energy of she's put upon, she's trapped, she like doesn't know what to do. She knows she's being used by this guy, but that's all she's ever been used to. It's very tragic and it's beautiful, and Shirley MacLaine nails it.
I will agree there for sure, Tanner. I think Fran is the heart of the movie. And I think part of the disconnect of that second half for me is that Fran really feels like the only character here. When I look at Sheldrake, when I look at CC Baxter, they feel like they are larger thematic ideas. And I think that's part of the disconnect for me, because the what we learn about Fran and about the sister and the brother-in-law and everything, I think that is all really great. But ultimately, she feels like the character that is being imposed upon by these other characters who really feel like larger ideas. And because of that, I just don't necessarily know if the three of them as a unit stand up on just a strictly character level. And that kind of tension there for me just didn't quite work.
Ryan?
Other people talk.
Well, I'm thinking about the casting right now and what we talk, because I think you all make good points, and it does come down to just how you view the movie and what happens with it. So I'm thinking about how excellent of a choice it was to cast both Shirley MacLaine and Jack Lemmon in their roles. I think,
And Fred McMurray.
Fred McMurray too, as he's kind of this old guy. He's in some other Wilder films, right, Ryan?
He's in Double Indemnity.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
of
yeah,
course
he is.
because he's Walter Neff in Double Indemnity, of course. And so seeing these three pretty heavy hitters of actors, duke it out on the screen between each other is very satisfying. And I think Jack Lemmon really, I like his performance a lot more in this than I did in Some Like It Hot, which I also saw recently. I find that he's kind of an over-the-top actor, but in this film he tones the over-the-topness down and tucks it kind of just below what I would think would be reasonable for a film. And he has all these like little facial expressions and these little mannerisms where he's like, okay, and he's like making like funny faces and stuff behind people's back that really just adds to my enjoyment and adds to the comedy. Because even though this film has all these important and tough, not super tough, but kind of dour themes at points, it is still funny. It's funny in the beginning and it's funny in the end, and there's lines throughout the whole thing that are humorous and make me, if not outright laugh, chuckle and be like, oh yeah, okay, that was funny. I like that.
Yeah,
I
think.
We'll go for it, Ryan.
I think Lemmon really does toe that line. I feel like if Baxter was a character that like on one hand was just straight interested in climbing the corporate ladder, we would view him as like a very like cynical kind of guy, and he'd be very less endearing. And if he was like just straight stupid and like does not understand what people are doing in his apartment, then we'd also be like, okay, that's not believable either. I think he toes that line between like wanting to get ahead and wanting to do, or wanting
Something
to
for
keep
himself.
a certain sense of oblivion. Yeah. Like, I think he toes that really, really well. Also on his past with Wilder, as Timo mentioned, I do think he's playing his best role here. In Some Like It Hot, it is much more of a vaudevillian comedy, so he does play it up a lot there. Here in The Apartment, he still does play it up, and I think it works for the Wilder world. It like makes a very interesting like obviously like this takes place in the real world, but it does have that like tiny bit of like fantastical flourish to it, like in the way that people talk and in the way that it's just so tight of a script. And I think Lemmon sells that really well. I feel like if you had an actor that didn't like embody those lines of dialogue as clearly as he does, it would be like, okay, like they're talking, but I know this was written for them, I also want to echo how great Shirley MacLaine is. While reading the biography of Wilder, apparently Wilder would spend takes upon takes upon takes trying to get Lemon to do the right thing, and he would give maybe a couple takes each to Shirley MacLaine. She was convinced. He would say this was because, she got it. But she would later say that she was convinced this was because he didn't think she could do any better than that. Which is very funny. But she is great in it. And so is McMurray, who's playing very much against type. He was more of a family actor at that point, even though he was in Double Indemnity a while back, 44 to 60. He was on like the Shaggy DA and stuff like that. He was in like much more like family-based stuff.
Like the
so much
Shaggy
so,
Dog?
I think so. Maybe I'm
Like
wrong.
the original The Shaggy Dog?
Yeah, he was like a family actor, like on like kids shows and stuff. So much so that
okay.
he was in like Disneyland after the apartment opened, and a woman came up to him and like yelled at him, and I think maybe hit him with her purse. I could be wrong.
Well,
Anyway.
I'd be right in that boat with her because he gives maybe one of the most unlikable performances
Oh, he's so unlikable.
like I've ever seen. Like anytime that he starts opening his mouth and he starts talking, he's like, "Yeah, soon enough, these dames, they want you to cheat on their wife. They want you to divorce their wife." I'm like, "You shut the fuck up, you son of a bitch." I hated him so much, and that is just a testament to how great McMurray is in that role, because it takes a very special kind of actor to elicit that sort of reaction from an audience, and he gets it.
Yeah, I mean,
it never feels unbelievable either. I'll just
No.
throw that in there.
That is the best and worst part, is that it never feels unbelievable.
it's an interesting balance between what Ryan was saying with the unbelievability and what Timo was saying with the sort of exaggerated nature of Billy Wilder's worlds, and I think all three of them handle the just below the surfaceness of that exaggerated wildness, heightened film reality. You see it in Lemon's performance of him holding back his frustration. He balances the wackiness of the situation he's in but always with, getting a cold and having to deal with that, or finding the things on his couch and having to clean up the thing, or taking out the bottles in his trash can out thing. All of that you can see in his eyes that I'm so done with this shit, but I need to put on my outward frame, continue working, and hopefully that'll get me to the end, to the ends that would end up justifying these means. And then with MacLaine, you see her always trying to put on a happy face, but that breaking down more often than not, and her hiding that pain so well, but still just letting it out enough to where there's so much more to this character. And as you start learning about her, it does reframe those situations from the beginning where McMurray, slaps her ass or whatever when they're coming out of the elevator, or they're having the conversation about how she is seeing someone, but it's not serious. And there's these layers to not only the dialogue, but the performances that make each element of this film heighten one another. And I think that does work really well in that sort of fanciful reality where everything is black and white, even though they had color at the time, and the office is just like basically infinite. Like you can't even see down to the end. It's so fucking exaggerated. But I do think it creates a sense of unrealism that is maybe why Abram is disconnecting from the film, because it is exaggerated in parts, but I think is used to great effect to enhance those themes and to create sort of a disorienting ridiculousness that increases the satire.
Yeah.
Tanner, you
thank you
really
for-
look
he
like
raises
you had
his hand.
something to say.
Thank you for bringing up the office, the setting, Tucker, with all the desks, because I found something very interesting trivia-wise, for that office set. So to create the effect of a vast sea of faces laboring at their desks at the company office, designers Alexandra Trauner and Edward G. Boyle decided to have full-size actors sat at the desk in front, and then behind them are children dressed in suits at tiny desks, and behind that are just tiny cardboard cutouts operated by wires. So
wow.
that's how they did that.
That's fucking cool.
And it looks
It
good.
allowed them to have that huge set that looks a lot more. It looks a lot bigger, and it looks a lot more realistic than you would have in like a studio.
Yeah.
Now, I want to go back to something Tucker said about the point about the sort of disorientation and the development of these different characters, because I don't know if I really felt that. I think it does heighten the satire as we're talking about the sort of infinite office, the sort of how big is this building, what is happening in here. That is accomplished very well. But when I think about the characters, Tucker, I totally agree with you about the development of Fran. She's easily my favorite character in the film, and the one that I feel really reveals more on a sort of plot and character level beyond just a thematic level. And so when I think about Sheldrake and when I think about C.C. Baxter, again, I think that Sheldrake, very great performance. He is fun to watch, even though he is an unfun gentleman, believe it or not. But ultimately, when I look at him, he is the corporate guy who doesn't really care about the integrity of his office, doesn't care about the integrity of his marriage, clearly. He is a stand-in. It's the same way I feel about Baxter. And so my problem with, we talk about deepening the satire, I think that the film it's stuck in this satire vortex. What I would have really wanted was more on the end of the film. I think the film ends too early. And the reason I think that is because we learn about Fran. She is challenged. We see her in these different situations. But ultimately, the moment for me when Baxter is broken out of his thematic stand-in as the sort of enabler of the corporate hierarchy and the nexus of the satire, when he finally gains his agency and does something, the movie ends. What happens to C.C. Baxter afterwards when he becomes a character who now has a life ahead of him instead of what I viewed as the cog in the larger satirical machine? Same with Sheldrake. What happens to Sheldrake when somebody says no to him? Because then, to me, he becomes more than just the guy with the family, the money, the job, who's cheating on his wife with the girl with the lie. And I think that, for me, is sort of where the film also lost me a little bit, because we could have further complicated and deepened, I think, the plot and the theme by seeing what happened next, instead of having what felt to me a little bit like a very archetypical Hollywood ending of, okay, and there ends the satire, and now the bad man has been defeated, and the good guy got the girl, and the movie ended. I think that's where we could have added more, and I could have felt like we really came full circle and came around to something, opposed to all of a sudden, okay, we've ended.
Yeah.
I think for me though, I want to put this into Abrams' hat and think about it, is that the thematic and the plot ideas of the film are told through the interactions with the neighbors. With the Dreyfuses are some characters that we've neglected a little bit to talk about. Ryan mentioned it earlier with the line "be a mensch," and for me, in reading the ending of the film ends not when he gets the girl or when he gets rid of Sheldrake. It's when he does something. He has it's the moment he gets agency is like the completion of his arc, and is the completion of his arc in front of the eyes of the neighbors, who I think are our stand-ins for the audience of how we're supposed to kind of view him. And so when they are looking at him and like, whoa, dude, that's a lot of booze you're taking out of your trash, and like, whoa, dude, you're really going at it every night. When we get to see that come full circle with his interactions with the doctor, and saving Fran's life, and all of that, I think pushes me into this direction more about what does it mean for C.C. Baxter himself to kind of escape the idea of just like robotic, non-autonomy, just like going and only doing the same thing every day. And when he gets agency as a character is when his arc is complete in my mind. There's also some Wilder context. Wilder really hated it when people thought more about his movies after they ended. He was like, it ends. Don't think about it anymore. It's like, they're like, what happens to these characters after the end of the film? Doesn't matter. The film doesn't go there. But I see where you're coming from in that regard.
I like what you say about the neighbors, because I think that they are perhaps one of the more interesting facets of how the film is constructed. But I think, Timo, when you call them stand-ins, I feel that also. I think that they are interesting characters, but I just think that really on the highest level, they're just there to motivate the plot. And sure, they could stand in for the audience and ask me to think about what happens when he gains agency. But my thing is, I don't know what happens when he gains agency, and I find that unsatisfying, because the whole film is about, this is how you must climb. From my perspective, if you're reading it thematically, satirically, it's about, this is what you must do to climb the corporate ladder in this hierarchy in New York. But then I suppose what happens when you don't? What happens when you remove yourself from that? I think that's when we could complicate your satire a little bit and think thematically of, okay, it'd be really damning if, yeah, he left the job, but now he doesn't have any money, and now nobody's going to hire him anymore. That's, I think, how you would really put that final nail in your critique of capitalism. Or is it something to the effect of, yeah, he's free now, his life is better. Sure, you don't want to think more about the ending after it happens, but what are we trying to say in the end? Because ultimately, if you're just telling me corporate America is bad, I know, I get that. but what happens when you remove yourself from that corporate hierarchy? That, I think, could have been so interesting, and it, for me, felt left unexplored. Even though, sure, he gains agency, what can he do in this agency when the whole film is about him being subservient to a larger structure to begin with?
Sounds like we need The Apartment 2. Do it. Let's do it for 60 years later. The Apartment 2. The two-partment.
I want a reboot,
The two-partment.
A reboot and a remake, Tanner.
Oh, I see. Okay.
The thing I would say about sort of that continuation of the plot after the film itself ends is you're right. That is a fascinating story to tell. But that's a whole nother story to tell. This is the conclusion of the arc that is set up, and all the sets that they built and all the characters that they established. This is the conclusion of that, and how the plot progression leads to the end. That, if you open that can of worms, I think it opens up too much. I think that's a whole nother world to explore. That's the next chapter of his life and the next set of challenges and character interactions that he's gonna have to introduce. And when a film is trying to be very focused in the tightness of its script and the relationships between these specific characters in these situations, I would rather it hone in on what does work and what it knows it needs to tell to communicate its themes and complete the arcs of its characters than, at the end, open another can of worms where it could keep going forever, because that's the rest of this guy's life. But it's sort of a projection that I think you getting to know Fran and Baxter and Sheldrake, you can project that trajectory into the future, but it not being told, I don't think, is a flaw of this film. Rather, it told such a compelling story with such interesting characters that I do want to know more. I don't, because Billy Wilder didn't want to make a sequel and he's dead, but the progression of this film is focused, and I don't think that Billy Wilder, I do think that Billy Wilder knew that he couldn't open up that can of worms without it getting out of hand and requiring ostensibly a whole nother script's worth of interactions and sets and progression.
Now, Tucker, are you telling me that we can't get Billy Wilder back for the two-partment? I'm
I
heartbroken.
don't think so, Tanner. I don't think
heartbroken.
so.
I'm
He's just too
unconsolable.
expensive, Tanner. He's just too
Damn
expensive
it.
these days.
Damn it.
I also think.
I'll go for it,
sorry. I also think it's part of how Wilder works as like a director. His sole purpose, he's coming from Weimar era Berlin. He's coming from classic Hollywood. His sole purpose is to entertain. I think what The Apartment does really well is that it is in many ways a message movie, but it's never solely about the message, if that makes sense. And I feel like if we went into this whole dichotomy of like, oh, what does capitalism do to him after this? Like, we would maybe lose the actual central romance, the central relationship between our two characters in service of the more larger thematic bits. And that's where I think it could fall prey to some larger stuff. And I also like how open-ended it ends. Timo said that Wilder obviously does not want people to think about the film after its ending. I don't know how true that is. I mean, he's definitely said it, but this is one where it definitely feels like it inspires you to kind of look ahead and think about what could happen next, especially because the people watching this are perhaps living in very similar situations in their own lives. They are also part of corporate America. They're watching that and going, what happens next? It reminds me very much of the ending of Modern Times, where Chaplin just like walks away down the sunset, and you're wondering like, what next? And it's left for you to decide. I also think the idea of the classic Hollywood ending really comes into play here, and I actually think it's a very interesting idea because of how much he sets up this whole like. I mean, obviously Wilder is a director who works around Hollywood a lot. He made Sunset Boulevard. He made Double Indemnity, which takes place in Hollywood. But I think that like, because it does take a very like meta stance in certain senses, like the references to Grand Hotel, the references to stars of the era like Mae West or did he say Mary
Garbo,
Pickford? Yeah, Greta Garbo. You have a lot of references to stars and stuff like that. I think the movie is trying to like have its cake and eat it too, and I personally think it works. It is that kind of message movie, but it also does. It still makes it like a happy and satisfying ending. I feel like if it was a really depressing ending, it wouldn't work with the comedy that the film started out with. If it was like capitalism ruined this guy's life, and now he's like his life sucks. It's like, well, damn. Like I think that goes back into the fantastical elements a little bit, where it's like it does give you that kind of like joyous Hollywood ending to a certain extent. And it's not completely like something else Wilder would have done, like say like the only one I can think of is his debut, The Major and the Minor, which like ends like just so abruptly, and it's just like, all right, they're getting married now, and it like makes no sense. Here it's just like she doesn't even say that she loves him. It's like just very like a live in this moment.
Shut up and deal.
Just,
What a great ending line. Holy shit.
It's a great line. And it's just like all of this like bigger Hollywood stuff doesn't matter. We're here right now. Shut up. Let's play cards. Let's do this. It like feels very much like it brings to mind that idea of the Hollywood ending, but it subverts it a little bit. In a way that I think is really interesting and really like powerful for these characters specifically. Especially with Fran being like someone who is very who's been hurt by love in the past perhaps, and who is not sure if she can fall in love with Baxter until that moment when she realizes that he's become a mensch. And that's also a great tracking shot too, when she's running down the street up to the apartment. Great tracking shot, really like freeing and liberating.
Yeah.
Anyway,
You mentioned shots. I think it's time to do the filmmaking fundamentals.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how this film looks and sounds, because I think it looks amazing. Ryan and I went and saw
Do you want to
it.
combine that with the wins and noms?
Go for it.
Yes, we can. Let's first
Just so you can
do
sort
the
of talk why. Okay.
Okay.
All right, go ahead.
I think Ryan and I saw this on like a newly restored in a theater and in like 4K. Oh my God, it looks so good.
glorious.
It looked amazing up there on the big screen. And Ryan, you mentioned it earlier, because it's in black and white. Wilder and I forget who was the cinematographer on this film are free to really explore more inventive and fanciful lighting setups. The lighting in the film just like it's classic black and white noir photography where if you really think about it, it doesn't make any sense, but oh my God, it looks beautiful. And so therefore I do not care. And
Yeah, I do think there's an exaggerated realism that the visuals also put off, as I was talking about that crazy office set, but that extends to everything else. Like, yeah, this isn't realistic, but it presents it artistically, which I think is more important for creating that sense of heightened realism, which, as I said, impacts the themes and the characters, and it all sort of feeds into the central idea of this is not reality, but it's so reality that it's a hyper reality that allows you to connect to it even deeper, I think.
I've got a question for the professors.
okay.
Yeah.
Is that all of
All
us?
of you, yes. What are you talking about? I'm getting a little bit. You're losing me a little bit, and I want to follow
Yeah.
you along here because we're talking about this exaggerated realism, but I only see realism. What am I missing?
So he's kind of employing similar like noir lighting setups like
Sure.
he would have done in like Double Indemnity or Sunset Boulevard.
Yeah.
But it's like the lighting that he's doing is unrealistic to a certain extent. Like it's very like dramatic lighting, lots of shadows, lots of like specific highlights in certain places rather than just like flat lighting, which like
Yeah.
you'd see on like a lot more like modern comedies, to be honest, like that don't really have a strong visual style. I think he's using that like very dramatic, like harsh lighting, harsh shadow to like emphasize like the two sides of like corporate America and like being a mensch and the grayness in between, which is where Baxter often finds himself. But like Tucker was saying about like the hyper realism, like it's too dramatic of lighting to be real, but it's emphasizing the very real thematic beats. So in that sense, it does have like it's never like so dramatic that it's like, oh, like this is like obviously a lighting setup, but like
Sure.
it never feels like completely real either.
If you want to think about a film that has good naturalistic lighting. I would say Moonlight has very good naturalistic lighting, and so if you compare the two, the way it just kind of looks, and the way the light bounces around on the frame, and how it illuminates stuff. I think about the set at the Asian restaurant with all this set. It's a very complicated set with all the lights in the backgrounds and the fish tanks and the piano players, and there's all that stuff happening in the set that maybe isn't super realistic, but is visually very engaging, and so fitting within the film, I think.
Tucker, hit it with those wins and noms. These two can ramble on about lighting structures all the live long day, but hit us with those wins and noms.
Here's what the viewers really care about, which is, of course, the films that it was nominated for, being Best Actor in a Leading Role, Jack Lemmon, Best Actress in a Leading Role, Shirley MacLaine, Best Actor in a Supporting Role, Jack Crucian, who I just assume is one of the bosses.
Dreyfus.
It's Dr. Dreyfus.
Oh, that makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Okay, actually, yes, and he does do a great job. Best Black and White Cinematography, and Best Sound. But then it won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Original Screenplay, Best Art Direction, and Film Editing. So a lot of those sort of production, the biggest production categories, it just took home, which I think is very well deserved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
Now, boys, we've been talking about the themes, we've been talking about performances, we've been talking about lighting even. We've delved into a lot of different aspects of this film, but I want to know, and I always like to close out a movie review with this. What's your favorite moments from this film? They could be comedy, they could be drama. What made you laugh? What made you cry? What made you anything in between?
I just want to say that this film really, I don't have a specific one yet, so wrap around to me, but this film really did make me feel. It really punches you in the gut in that last act, and I was really feeling it. I was like, I'm sad. This movie is sad. But then it ends, and it's happy and funny.
Me when I'm sad. I'm sad.
Yeah.
I'm sad.
Tucker, you had one?
My favorite moments consistently, and I sort of consider it a series of moments, which is whenever the dialogue is focusing very heavily on like numbers and analytics, and then ending that with a punctuating of blank Y's, like adding the suffix Y's to the end of everything. It really creates a unique tone that every time it happened, I'm like, he did the thing again. but it creates a sort of internal culture for that office. Like, everyone is saying that, and he's saying it because his bosses are saying it, but then it becomes something that he just says in his life. But it creates a unique tone that only this film has, is punctuating everything with Y's. Makes no fucking sense, but it's very unique, very fun, and punchy. It makes a lot of sequences verbally and with just on a high note of, oh, that was clever. That's the way it crumbles. Cookie wise.
Yeah.
God, that's such a good line. Oh my god.
One of my favorite ones is I have two. I have two that I'm gonna bring up.
Cheater.
Okay, sorry. When Cece Baxter and Fran are walking out of the office for the first time, he's trying to convince her to go to the Music Man or whatever, and he's like, I know everything about you. I've memorized your address and your social security number or whatever. And he's like, I even know that you got your appendix out. And she says, well, don't tell the guys in the office that. They might get the wrong idea.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the other one? Oh, Christ. Oh, hang on. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
I can fill the time.
Go for it, Abram.
Mine, the whole fucking sequence when he's going through his Rolodex to call and reschedule appointments.
Oh,
is
that is a
fantastic.
great one. That is a great one. Yep.
Also a great editing moment of just like cutting between the things and him just continuously blowing his fucking nose and spinning the Rolodex. Okay, gotta type in another number. It all flows so well together that it makes it really funny.
Okay, I got my other one. It's when it's, what is it, Fran's brother or something like that. Brother-in-law,
Yeah.
thank you. Bursts into his apartment and she like goes back to get ready or whatever. And Cece Baxter turns to him and he points angry. He's like, "You want a martini?"
I'll get you a drink.
Also, quick trivia: in that scene where he gets punched, he actually does get punched on set, and they kept that take in. He was supposed to like feign and fall to the side or whatever, but he forgot. So Shirley MacLaine's reaction in that is genuine to seeing
Shit.
Jack Lemmon get punched in the face.
Favorite moments is hard. Obviously, there are a lot of them. Comedy-wise, I go back to the scene where he's picking up Margie in the bar.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Where they're drunk talking about like Fidel Castro and his empty apartment, and they keep dancing like in that little circle together, cheek to cheek, when everyone's left. It's funny stuff. More dramatic wise. I know, yeah. I always like the New Year's scene at the end with Fran and Sheldrake. I think it's
that's great.
It's a very like hit a home scene. There was one more that I was thinking of, which I guess is cheating. It's just hard. There's so many. Oh, the reveal of the mirror when he first looks at it and realizes it's hers. Such a great shot. Great moment too.
And there's a great line associated with that, and he's like, "It's broken." She's like, "Yeah, it makes me look how I feel," which is like a super cheesy line, but Shirley MacLaine sells it. Yeah, Timo, do you got one?
Timo.
I like all of those moments. I don't know if I've got a specific one that I can think of right now. But there are so many comedic lines in this film that they drop and they're funny, and then you're on to the next one, and it's just like that. And so, I mean, if someone were to go through and write down all the jokes, they would have a pretty long list from this film.
Yeah. Well,
should we do it? We're gonna have to figure this out. So Ryan, will you send me a message with?
Are we taking Ryan's score into account? Usually we don't with guests.
We don't. Okay, Ryan, but send me.
I still want to see what he would say.
Absolutely.
Send me your score out of 10 with 1 decimal point.
Yes.
And then we will rank this and see.
That's the goal.
And see where it ends up. Okay, are you ready? Are you ready? 3. You got your numbers put in.
I got numbers in.
All right, 3, 2, 1. Boom. I punched my number in.
Bada boom.
Sorry.
Bada bing, bada boom.
Abram preemptively sorry.
Ding, 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 ding. Okay, well, Ryan's score. He's trying to impress us. Ryan gave it a 9.9, almost a 10. He gave me a 10 at first, and then he said, "No, never mind, 9.9."
I was reminded of this scene about the Social Security number that.
How he knows about her Social Security number.
Yeah,
I think that actually works really well for me. And Tanner and I were cracking up in that scene when it happened, because it sort of like puts him in that heightened dorkiness state of he's so oblivious to social cues that he's like, this is the way to impress a girl. I know everything about you. And she's so used to like receiving those ridiculous comments from men because everyone in the building's always trying to hit on her. She's just like, this fucking guy. And like, I think it's a great start to their relationship, which we honestly didn't talk too much about, but I love the way their relationship progresses, and especially because from One Direction, it's not solely based on the romance between them. It's a friendship and a fighting back against the higher-ups that is what connects them, but you've still got Jack Lemmon in the background sort of pining over her with his every move. And I think it's a really great dynamic that you don't get a lot in Hollywood movies, of sort of a one-sided relationship that's based on camaraderie rather than entirely romance.
Yeah.
Okay, well,
Timo, what are the scores?
We gotta get to these numbers, man. So the score, the breakdown, the average of our 4 scores, because as much as we love to have Ryan here, it is our list, and he's got all the bargaining and influencing power that he can, but his number unfortunately doesn't end up in the calculations. With a score of 9.25, The Apartment is going to go just below 12 Years a Slave and above Silence of the Lambs. Way up at the top, immediately up into the top 10, kind of like I thought it would be. So it's got a score of 9.3 technically, but 12 Years a Slave has a technically score of 9.33. And so at place number 7 out of 51, that's where The Apartment is going.
It's very good. It's way up there. It's one of the greats. It's one of the greats, best picture-wise.
And and the point breakdown, Abram saying sorry because he only gave it a 7.9. The rest of us, me giving it a 9.7. Tanner gave it a 9.6, and Tucker a 9.8. So pretty high marks from 3 of us. Pretty high marks from 4 of us, and the 5th one is the odd one out. But that's just the way it crumbles, cookie-wise.
Yeah.
It's still respectable. 7.9 is a respectable number.
Oh yeah, 7.9 is still a very good score.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I just like to hear you in your closing thoughts, Abram, to sort of reflect that number, because honestly, I was expecting like a 6 or something out of you with all the
Well,
criticisms you were levying.
When I'm sitting here with these four handsome gentlemen explaining to me all of this shit that I don't have any basis for, it helps buoy what I think is a good movie. Technically, I think it's basically flawless, but on a straight plot level, I think that the turn of Fran's suicide is great, and I really was genuinely very much engaged by everything that happened up to that. Where the film lost me was after that, and for me, I think that it fails on a character and a theme level, and that's what holds it back for greatness for me. And I get your guys' reading of it, but I simply think I had a different one. And for what I was looking for, not caring about its subversion on a Hollywood ending or caring about how it links into his larger filmography and this sort of behind-the-scenes stuff, just as a film that I'm watching in the context of all the Best Picture winners, I don't think that it hits the highs that we've seen otherwise. I didn't find it to pack the emotional punch that you guys did. I just found that the characters ended up feeling like stand-ins for a theme that I felt didn't go far enough. So while I enjoyed watching it, it just did not have the resonance for me.
That's fair.
There you go. That's
Ain't nothing we can do about it. Maybe lobotomy in the future, but we'll see.
We'll see.
We'll get a
on the table.
Kickstarter. We'll get a Kickstarter
Once
started going.
BLB is rich and famous,
Lobotomize-
we can afford Abrams
Lobotomize
lobotomy.
Abram to make him like the apartment, and lobotomize Tucker to get him to watch TV, because that was something that Timo suggested like a year ago. Remember that?
We'll have to get a good lobotomizer who can do them both at the same time. You know, double wield those ice picks.
Ambidextrous. What kind of
Lobotomist?
doctor does that? A lobotomist?
I don't think
Nope,
doctors
I
are
made
allowed
that
to
up.
do that
I don't
anymore.
think lobotomies are allowed, dude.
I don't know
if they
YouTube
ever did
rabbit
that.
hole about lobotomies one time.
Yeah.
Of course you did. Shall we spin that funky little spin wheel and find out what we're
Oh
going to
my
watch
God.
next week?
Yo.
Ryan's going to get to hear
Spin
what
that
it is.
funky spin wheel, white boy.
You don't have
the
to say
wheel.
no more, Tucker. Say no more.
Oh, excuse me. We should change the song to that. That's funny, Tucker. Thank you for coming up with that. But wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us squeal. Is it on digital? Is it on real? Wheel, what's your deal?
And look at that number.
Ooh.
The number is 8. Mr. Listmaster Tucker, can you correspond that to our films, our great list of best pictures yet unseen? And tell us what
Yeah,
we're going to
as
be
of-
watching next time.
The List Master General Tucker Hazel.
That's what they call
Listmaster
me.
General.
That is what they call me. And on this there day of quest and spinning, we have been generated out of 42 numbers 8, which lands us squarely in 2006 with a very stacked cast, including Alec Baldwin, Ray Winstone, Martin Sheen, Vera Farmiga, Mark Wahlberg, Matt Damon, Leonardo DiCaprio, Jack Nicholson, directed by Martin Scorsese. We are watching The Departed.
Oh, hey, baby.
Interesting.
The Departed.
How many of you guys have seen this before? Ryan, we can include you. I've seen it.
I have. I actually might watch Infernal Affairs and then watch The Department again because I've never seen that one.
Okay.
What the fuck's Infernal Affairs?
That's
The movie it's based on.
The Departed is a remake. It's an American remake of Infernal Affairs.
Timo, did you say you said it before?
Martin Scorsese made a remake?
Yeah.
I've never seen this, so I'm looking
Okay.
forward to it. Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't
Tucker
either.
and Timo going in fresh.
It's a good one.
Okay.
It is a pretty good movie, I think. I'm
That's
excited
good.
to
Great
return
Jack
to
Nicholson lines.
it. Well, yeah, it's also got some, maybe some Jack Nicholson lines that aren't too PC, if you know what I mean.
Certainly not.
No.
Good. I'm excited.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to watching The Departed. Great discussion that we've had about The Apartment today. Thank you, Ryan, for coming on and
course.
and giving
Thanks for having me.
giving us your knowledge and your opinions about this very, very excellent movie. If you haven't seen it, maybe go watch it because it's great and we like it a lot. Even Abram, who wasn't quite as hot, still thought it was a good movie. And so, if I am looking for a better recommendation, I don't think I can find one. So, we will see you guys next week.
Maybe Schindler's List.
Maybe Schindler's
Top
List.
of the list.
Dune.
Yeah. Well, maybe. You'll have to go watch our Dune review video to find
my
out more
God.
about that. But The Departed from old Marty Scorsese is going to be
The Departed.
going to be up next week. Going to be about South Boston. Well, maybe we'll get some really really awesome and horribly inaccurate Boston accents that will really
Hold on.
piss off Abram as a Boston
Horribly inaccurate. What are you talking about? You go down to South, you watch Departed.
Well, whatever happens, we'll be here to talk about it, and we'll catch you guys next week. Peace.
Well, I mean, we all are also, we do throw monkey wrenches into everything.
Everyone say what movie you hope we get next.
Phantom Menace. Janvier Bardem.
Janvier?
Janvier?
There's,
Where's the
there's
N
not an
coming
N.
from?
He's adding an extra N. But he also
Javier.
he's just
Janvier.
He's just
What
being
the
a bro.
fuck?
Are you sure there's on the N?
I'm like 100%
Well,
certain.
I guess his name isn't Janvier. That's a good point.
It's Javier. Like the name that people have, Javier.
Janvier.
Abrams never met anyone of Hispanic origin.